to Transformation in Trials.
Welcome to Transformation in Trials. This is a podcast exploring all things transformational in clinical trials. And nothing is off limits in this podcast, and we invite guests from the whole spectrum of the clinical trials community. And we're your hosts. I'm Ivanna.
And I'm Sam. And today's guest is Angela Slocum. And we're going to be exploring the transformation that Angela's seen in our industry, both from the perspective of her considerable time in big pharma, but also from her most recent job at a technology vendor. So let's get into the discussion. Welcome to the show, Angela. We were really pleased that you could join us for this first edition of Transformation in Trials.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We obviously know each other, Angela, and I know you've got a fascinating background and perspective. But rather than me talking to our listeners about that, why don't you get us started by giving us a bit of background about yourself?
Sure, my pleasure. So I'm going to expose my geekdom to the world, I guess. I started in big pharma in the early 90s. I came out of school with a bachelor's degree in statistics. And at that time, it's all about who you know very often. A woman who was working in the industry she had attended my alma mater and had expressed that they were looking for junior statisticians to join the team. So I went in with a bachelor's degree, which is kind of odd and interesting. I think most statisticians would say if you only have a bachelor's degree, you really don't know statistics. And I would argue that that's true. But they had a specific niche need for more junior resources. So that got my foot in the door. I did go back to school and received a master's degree with an emphasis in statistics. But again, I'm not a full-on applied or theoretical statistician. So while I say I started in statistics, I don't often call myself a statistician out of respect for those that truly are indeed. And, I think the industry it was evolving even then, and statistics has really become a predominant science, if you will. And so, again, the higher level of education was really preferred. So it was an opportunity for me to pivot. I moved over into data management, which honestly was a really interesting perspective, right? To go into data management, having been in statistics, where in statistics, obviously, you're kind of the last phase of the data, right? You're prepping the data for submission. You recognize what imperfections in the data do to your analysis and to your endpoints and such. So to take that knowledge and then transfer that into data management, where you're then cleaning the data and prepping it for analysis, I had a perspective that most other data managers did not. So that served me quite well. I had different roles in data management. I was always leveraging my SAS experience, which again was something that many data managers did not have. So data manipulation was easier for me than them. They were relying on technology, right? Which is not always as powerful as a programming tool as writing actual code. So again, having that experience in my back pocket was helpful. My last role in data management, I was an asset lead for several different programs. I worked in oncology. I worked in hepatitis B. I worked on a drug for shingles. I started my career in anti-infectives. Antivirals. So broad exposure to different therapeutic areas. I then was asked to participate in what they called a job rotation. I went over to the clinical operations side for a year and helped support site selection. So site selection has become a science all of its own recently. Using statistical methodologies to support the identification of compliant and good sites, if you will. So I, again, leveraged some of my programming background and built some programs, some processes to help them with site selection. And then there was a 3-letter acronym called RBM that was bubbling. And we, of course, as a company wanted to or needed to get in on that. And it was a question at that point, where does this new initiative fit in a department? Where does it belong? And I think, you know, some departments, ClinOps, for example, was a little shy to jump in on it. Data operations, it seemed like perhaps a better fit there because there was, again, so much about it was setting up the data to identify and support the risk-based methodology, that's having the organization sit within the data department seemed to make sense. So they pulled me back and they said, we need to get this RBM thing off the ground. And so there I was again coding and reading documents from Transcelerate around what a KRI is and all their examples of how to establish KRIs. And at the same time, we were starting to build a centralized monitoring team. That kind of transformed into my last role in Big Pharma. I was the head of clinical data reporting and analytics. And this was again, a new function because I think at the same time that risk-based monitoring was starting to bubble, I think the industry was recognizing that our ways of reviewing data were antiquated. And we needed to get away from listings and we needed to start embracing new technologies and new ways of reviewing the data, not just from a risk-based perspective, but you know, leveraging analytics, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. So so this was a new discipline within, again, our company, and part of what we were responsible for was the RBM methodologies, but also really influencing the tools that the data reviewers were using. So we had kind of we had 2 parts to the team. We had like an intake process established. So any data reviewers, whether they come from the clinical space, medical monitors, ClinOps, site managers, site monitors, or anybody from the data management space, anytime they needed a report or tool, it would come through our team. It would go through an assessment of whether or not something was already available that they could leverage, that they just weren't aware of, right? Because in a big company, the left hand doesn't often know what the right hand is doing. And, you know, if there wasn't something available kind of out of the box, so to speak, was there something that could be easily modified to accommodate this new request? And if it was a completely brand new request, then we would meet with that end user, gather requirements, pass that off to the other side of the team, which actually developed the solutions. And then we were responsible for maintaining this library. We were using Spotfire and JReview at the time, and still leveraging SAS in the background to do the heavy data transformations that were often needed to surface the data through those tools. Yeah, and that was the end of my road there in Big Pharma. And then as of about 3 years ago, February, I find myself at eClinical Solutions. So a bit of a shift from pharma to a technology vendor.
Well, that is a really interesting background, and you can really see that you've witnessed a lot of the big shifts that we've seen as an industry, going from pure statistics to implementing some more of the signaling tools, and actually being part of the whole programming part, where there were no tools available. You had to make your own models for making that happen.
Yes.
So I would be curious to understand, so being now with a technology vendor and actually having built some of those tools that help the pharmaceutical companies like you were in, how would you say the work has changed for the pharmaceutical companies?
The work has changed a lot. You know, I mean, when I started, we were we didn't even have EDC systems per se. We did, but I mean, it was a very different version of what we know today. Everything was being written on paper. Queries were being faxed to sites. We had 3-part NCRs, right, to manage changes in the database. So technology obviously has played a huge role in transformation. And so has the science, right? The science in and of itself, I think, is the fundamental driver for everything that sits on top of it, right? The science is so much more sophisticated than when it used to be. There's so much more data than there used to be. The data types are vast. The amount of data and the roles and the skill sets needed to support all that. So I put at the foundation of all of that is the science, right? And bringing medicines to patients faster. That really is what has transcended all of the subsequent change, in my opinion.
Wow. Yeah. So I was just reflecting on your background, Angela. I didn't know some of that, by the way. So I learn something new every time I speak to you. So stats, data management, senior management positions, RBM, lead, now implementation consulting. What's been the biggest paradigm shift that you've seen in our industry across this big career that you've had within both pharma and tech vendor?
Yeah, I mean, I again, for me, it's always been about the data, and I think the data is our biggest asset, right? And we can't review data the way we used to. It's simply not effective. It's not efficient. And again, that's because there's more of it. That's because it's more complicated than it used to be. And the demands of the science and the industry say we have to do things faster. We can't forget that this is a business, right? Pharmaceutical companies are there to make money. There's a lot more competitive intelligence than there used to be that drive decision makings on their part around the trials and the endpoints and the planning for particular analysis and the planning for the ultimate filings. So with those demands, I often would kid that I didn't work for Big Pharma. I actually worked for the FDA, right? Because ultimately they were responsible for the timelines that we were under. When you get on, and I would say this about any regulatory agency, when you get on their docket for a filing, you can't just call them and say, well, we're running a little behind. Can you accept our filing next month instead of this month? It doesn't work that way, right? So their calendar is what defines your calendar. And so how do you do things? How do you do things faster and quicker and bring the drugs to market? It's all about the technology, being open to process change, recognize that change brings opportunity, right? In our last call, Sam, we were hearing that sometimes people see it as a detrimental thing to themselves, their careers, the teams that they've built. But for me, change brings opportunity. And so I think the big paradigm shifts to your question are around this more risk-based approach. The recognition that you don't have to look at every single data point that you collect to feel confident in the rigor of your data. But that's a big mind change for people that were used to working that way. And then having tools to support this new approach and people embracing these new tools and having enough confidence in them to know that they're effective. And I think that's hard for people, right? We want to micromanage.
Yeah, no.
Especially your data here.
Yeah, especially your data. Yeah.
Do you mind if I just jump in on the RBM topic specifically?
Sure.
I would imagine with RBM, you weren't just sitting there one day and somebody just said, look, go and create an RBM initiative. This must have developed over a period of time. Something must have triggered that. Can you maybe just take us back to the early days of when RBM was being discussed, and what was going on in the industry at that point, and why was there a big shift, and why did you get involved in RBM specifically?
Yeah, you know, you started to hear the word transcelerate. That was the first word that I heard, and there's always curiosity. And when you're in a big company, you look for opportunities, right, to be involved in the shiny new toy. I can't say I raised my hand for RBM specifically, but when there's a buzz, and people want to know. And very often in big companies, change management starts with a poster hanging in the wall, right? Transcelerate, the new way of running your clinical trials, and it piques interest, right? So next thing you know, you're being influenced by this propaganda, so to speak. And we had a member of our very senior leadership team that was part of the consortium. So he had a vested interest in inserting the methodology into our company. And we were fortunate because we had him on the forefront of the consortium as a member of our organization. So we probably had a little bit of insider information that was coming down from on high. In the beginning, it was a lot of reading, a lot of watching presentations. There was documentation coming out of the Transcelerate Consortium from the get-go. And I would say fairly quickly, I'm saying quickly, that's a relative term. Again, a formal initiative was established. And we had leads from different areas of the R&D space. So we had folks that were responsible for addressing RBM from the perspective of the influence it would have on site monitoring. Myself, who was involved in the data side of it, right? Establishing the methodologies. And then we actually also recognized that we needed a dedicated group of individuals to embrace this new way of looking at the data. And from that, a department was formed. So it was a bit of an evolution. This took time. It's not like one day RBM was born. And, I think I'll speak from my side, from the data perspective, this was brand new. While we had tools in our back pocket for surfacing data to our end users, and of course we had programming backgrounds and could manipulate data, this was quite different. And so it was a bit of an effort to kind of rethink what we had, and how can we leverage what we have, or how do we not leverage what we have, and move that forward.
No, that's really interesting insight. And do you think, beyond obviously the hype and the top-down approach being descended from Transcelerate, do you think the actual benefits of RBM were realized, and did you start to see those in your role, or was it too still early in that whole process?
Dare I say, you told me to be candid. I think it's really hard to quantify the benefits.
Okay.
And we had people that were dedicated to trying to quantify the benefits and present to senior leadership. It's really hard to come up with KPIs to describe, to demonstrate the value add, right? Because when you're performing risk-based review, the hope is that you don't find issues with the data. So when you find nothing, how do you demonstrate it's bringing value? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So now there's some other more tangible things, like, well, we're sending less site monitors to the actual sites, right? We're saving money with travel. Perhaps we could unfortunately reduce the workforce, right? So there's things there that had monetary, results attached to them, but the real crux of doing less data review and proving that it was more robust, right? Because those two things together are kind of contrary. I'm doing less per se, but it's bringing more value. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting perspective. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I can definitely see why that would be so if you're looking at this through the lens from a true data standpoint.
Yeah. Oh, I did my job. I'm a central monitor and I reviewed all my data. I didn't find anything. Okay, you had a good day.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And also, I mean, risk-based monitoring was one of the first steps away from having this very clear grasp of all your data. But now that when we're experimenting, dare I say, with machine learning and AI for our clinical data, it gets even more abstract and even more black box.
That's right.
And have you experienced anyone experimenting in that space?
With the AI and ML? Not extensively, but I think what you said is I totally agree that it goes back to the comment I made. You have to trust that the AI and ML is doing its job, right? And when it's not surfacing something for an A type who's analytical, right? That's a hard concept to get a hold of. Yeah.
We've seen, at least in some of the companies that I have collaborated with, that this is one of the reasons why adopting digital technologies may be really hard, because it may not bring any benefits right now. Right. It's more like on an experimental stage. So finding the thing that may actually revolutionize the way you work is actually hard work.
Yeah. And it's funny, I can recall in our early days of implementing RBM with rudimentary tools, we did find one site that I can't remember if it was a thermometer, it was some sort of vital signs tool was calibrated incorrectly. And that was surfaced through an RBM KRI. And that example was exploited until it couldn't be exploited anymore because the examples were few and far between, quite honestly. I can go back to my early days. One of my colleagues can tell the story better than I, but we had a fraudulent site in anti-infectives. We were studying, it was either bronchitis or pneumonia, I think, and you had to take a sputum sample, right? And your sputum sample was tested for a particular pathogen. And there were only X number of pathogens that were part of our protocol, right? We were studying, our anti-infective against certain microbials. So this particular site, to enroll patients, he basically took an acceptable sputum sample and replicated it. And so it looked like he had, say, 10 subjects that were eligible for the trial, but it was really only one sputum sample. This was 25 years ago, when RBM didn't exist. Supposedly something like that now would be a perfect use case, but these examples are few and far between, thankfully. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I do have another question. This part of statisticians adopting new ways of working or new technologies, coming from a change management background, and also having worked with statisticians when they adopt a new tool. For instance, I was part of a company that trained everyone in R instead of SAS, and that was a huge undertaking, and especially for some of the more experienced statisticians in the space, that was a whole new way of being.
Sure.
In your experience, how do you bring, especially this kind of massively skilled, very experienced people along on these transformations that are happening more and more often in our space?
Yeah, that's hard. And I would say, it's not just hard for the highly technical, well-versed, industry experts, but even the general data reviewer, there's just the shift. Change comes with fear. I think it's an innate human reaction. I think there, as a leader in organizations, we need leadership who can position change in a way that the fear is measured, monitored. People fear for their livelihood, right? They feel fear for their happiness. But again, I'll say it, change also brings opportunity. So, you rise with the change or you don't. And that is a personal choice, right? Because what we've seen in the past 20 years is only the tip of the iceberg, right? We're going to have another 20 years of change. So where we start our careers, regardless of where we are in them today and where we end them, it's going to look very different. And I think that has to be understood. But, again, it's kind of a human thing. We become comfortable in our skin and we resist change. So I would emphasize kind of the organization's responsibility to present change in a way that is met with excitement and where opportunities are surfaced and skill sets can be leveraged in different ways.
And on that one, Angela, have you seen examples of when that's happened in a positive way and the change has been communicated in a positive way, and therefore the implementation of the project has been successful? And conversely, have you seen situations where that hasn't happened and you've therefore had a negative effect on a project? I'd be curious to get your actual experiences on that.
Yeah, it's a good question, Sam. I think so. I think there's a difference between, let's face it, if a company makes a decision to go in a particular direction, it's going to happen, right? But there's a difference between bludgeoning somebody with that change and carrying them along the journey, for sure. I think, this may sound, a bit soft, but again, recognizing the personal implications on change. Yes, the change might be a technology, the change might be an organizational, shift or such, but it's the personal aspects that that generally folks are going to respond to. And so I think time has to be taken to recognize that component. Good change management includes a cascade of that type of information all the way down to the individual, right? So when fear is often driven from the unknown, right? So when the change is not communicated effectively, I think that drives fear as well. The more you know, the more you can control or feel in control. And I've seen aspects of change where communication wasn't terribly effective, and that just drove chaos. But when the communication is managed, and again, it's cascaded right down to the individual level, I think you get a better response.
I think you hit the nail on the head, because we can be the most company per man or woman in the world, but ultimately individuals, rightly or wrongly, care about how it impacts upon them personally. Right. So, right. From my standpoint, if somebody's taking me on a change journey, I want to know how it's going to affect me personally, and that's then right. The other benefits to the wider organization will follow through as a result of that. I agree. Yeah. And I think just kind of a bit of a follow-up question related to that, on what we've seen change in the industry, if I was to think about it, I think in the last 2 years, the biggest shift was probably towards more decentralized trials, largely driven by the pandemic. But we were already seeing a lot of that, but I think that accelerated a shift towards decentralized trials. 5 years ago, it was probably more of a shift into the cloud, even though other industries have maybe done that a bit quicker. And maybe 10 years ago, it was all about going from paper processes to electronic.
Yeah.
Not sure if you agree with those, and we're also curious to hear what your predictions might be for the following 2, 5, and 10 years. And I didn't share that question with you in advance.
No, you didn't. Oh my gosh, that's a big one. Yeah, that's a big one.
Who knows what the future holds? But yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball. I agree with what you stated. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting for somebody like me who still sees themselves as pretty young. I've seen so much. It's crazy. It's crazy. So again, what is it going to be like in 20 more years? I don't know. I always liken, you know, our research to what we experience personally, right? This is the first time I've ever had a doctor's appointment virtually. And we're already seeing impacts of the pandemic and recognizing that we may never go back to what we used to know. And I think that's probably true here too. Obviously, clinical trials, there has to be some patient contact. So probably not the you know, hard and fast example, best example. Where else are we going to go? Yeah, I think the AI and ML space is really just scratching the surface with everything we do. Right now, with the pandemic, we have robots waiting on us at restaurants. Things like that are going to become more prevalent across the board, and to me, that relates to the AI and ML space in clinical research. Right, the ability to have the computers do the work for us and surface the data issues for us. I think data manipulations and transformations will become more streamlined with the technology. Right now, we still have a lot of people shepherding some of those transformations. Would they have to be built, and then we can leverage the computer to take them and move them forward. But there may be a point when they don't even have to be built, right? That the AI is going to, or the ML perhaps in particular, is going to recognize how that data needs to be transformed and do it for it. What else? I don't know. I mean, roles. I think this RBM thing and now RBQM is still immature in a lot of ways. You know, you asked before about how do we realize the benefits. I'm not sure that we're any better at it now than we were, you know, 10, 15 years ago when Transcelerate came out. So I think there's still room to grow there too. And I guess the only other thing I would say, and this has been evolving for a few years now, and I think has a long way to grow. This concept of data management isn't what it used to be. Data managers used to be very transactional, and now they're being asked to be more, what I would say, data scientists. And so those that have started their careers in industry under that premise or that title of data manager, old school, perhaps had the biggest transformation to make to leverage all these new tools and things. Skill sets are different. And there's a huge opportunity there, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting how new roles emerge that didn't exist, and how existing roles kind of shift with the way the technology supports them also.
Yes.
But Angela, you've also made quite a change from being in the pharmaceutical industry to moving to a technology vendor. Can you tell us more about your current role and how that's is different from what you experienced before?
Sure. Yeah. When I left Big Pharma, I was forced to leave. My site was closed down, and we were all without jobs. I think I knew that I could obviously go to another pharma company, right? That kind of seemed obvious. I was struggling with how to leverage my skill set because it is diverse and it doesn't necessarily lend itself to one role in particular, right? All pharmaceutical companies are structured relatively the same. And I couldn't see myself jumping on another gerbil wheel and riding another 20 years with big pharma again. Although I knew I could influence, right? Because of my experience, I wasn't interested. So I think I knew I wanted to go small. I was fortunate to meet some of Sam and my eClinical colleagues while I was still at Big Pharma, because we were assessing vendors for a clinical data repository. So that's how the connection was made. And this role was new. It was born with my hiring, with the acknowledgement that one of the gaps that we had in our company, where we were really good at implementing our software from a technical perspective, but where we were lacking was the practical implementation, right? How do we actually get these clients to use the software, to understand how it can work for them? And so hence the role was born. We now have 7 other implementation consultants. I'll give a plug. We're an all-female team, which I'm very proud of. They're amazing women, amazing humans. But I think we're really making a difference because I think the individuals that make decisions about bringing technology into a company aren't necessarily those that are going to use the product. So very often the ones that are going to be using the product are caught a bit off guard. And you can train somebody in how to use technology. Everybody's pretty adept, honestly, to some degree. But how does it apply to me? As Sam said before, it always comes back to me, right? How am I going to do my day job now? How am I going to be impacted? And so that's the role that the implementation consultant team plays here at eClinical, trying to bridge that gap and marry their day jobs to this new technology so they can walk away after implementation with an understanding about how to do their jobs differently.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you've got a great role there, Angela. I guess the only downside is working with the business development team. Hey, yeah. For our listeners, I work with Angela at eClinical and the BD team, so I'm messing around.
Yeah.
Well, just rounding off, Angela, the final question that we ask all of our guests. If there was literally one thing that you could change tomorrow in our industry that you think would have the biggest impact, what would that be?
Oh my God, one change that would have the biggest impact.
And it can be anything.
Yeah.
People, process, technology, culture.
Gosh, I wish things didn't move so fast.
Okay.
That's one thing I wish could change, but in a sense, that's an inappropriate ask, right? Because the world is exciting and all, but I think between, gosh, the demands of the science and the amazing science that's going out there, all of that reflects on us, and we have a lot of pressure. We have a lot of pressure to deliver in a good way, right? To really influence the health of the world, right? Of all the individuals in the world. What would I change? Gosh, Sam, less demanding BD people at eClinical Solutions.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
Would you go with that?
You can have that one if you like. Is kind of put you on the spot.
Yeah, a little bit. Gosh, I wish we could do a better job at keeping up. I really do, because I feel like And I don't mean this just from like a day job and my meetings and demands at my day job. My day job reflects what's going on in the world, right?
Yeah.
And it is just crazy. The vast amount of diseases, the unfortunate diseases that are being researched, the type of research that's going on, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And I feel, and I think my team would agree, we have a small piece of it, but we feel responsible to a greater cause, and when things move so fast, it's hard to keep up.
Totally. I think we can all kind of empathize and reflect with that one. Sadly, Angela, that's all we've got time for today. If listeners did want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I think that would be the easy thing. You can Google my name. I've got some other personal stuff out there where you can find some contact information for me. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the most obvious.
We didn't even get into that, actually, and I know you're in a band, so please do Google Angela and go and watch her band. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Angela. That's been great talking to you as always. Really appreciate your time on today's show, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you both. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to Transformation in Trials. If you have suggestions for a guest for our show, write to hosts@transformationintrials.com. You can find more episodes in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and the show notes are available at transformationintrials.buzzsprout.com. Thank you for listening.